86.
Yeah, turn those off. But this is you guys right here.
Okay.
And that'll get you guys.
Thanks, Tim.
All right.
Appreciate
and
it.
then quit up there. And if somebody has a, they'll press a button or something, you'll see it.
Okay.
Should light. Good luck.
Thank you.
I want to fix the left side of this room. The left side of the work we're doing on general appropriations.
Yeah, right. You need to click those because you got those on. Click them one more. Click them one more time. That clicks them all. You got 5 mics on. You got 4 mics on. 3, 2, 1. Number 40. Number 40. You need to twice. There's 1 mic on. Number 2's on. I am.
No, you're a main mic. I think you're on. Oh, wait, it's
86. Okay, here we go.
What is, it's not 90 down there.
No. No.
I guess 91 is the speaker, Tim. Tell them to be careful not to hit that mic. Let people standing, sit in the chairs.
Yeah.
Tim, is your mic on? Is the microphone on?
I think he's 91. I think he's on.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Just pull it closer to you, if you will.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity to welcome you here. This is a joint meeting of the Higher Ed Committee of the State Senate as well as the Higher Ed Committee of the State House. We want to thank you for being here. I want to introduce myself. I am Buddy Carter, and I'm chairman of the State Senate Higher Education Committee, and I'm joined by the chair of the House Higher Ed Committee, Chairman Carl Rogers. We are here today to hear a presentation by Mr. Tim Cannell of the Georgia Student Finance Commission. We're going to dispense the formalities and go right into our presentation. Let me, before we do that, let me encourage you, please, if you have any questions, if you'll mash your button, but be careful. We're having some technical difficulties with those, but if you do have a question, mash your button and we'll try to call on you. For those of you who are standing, if you want to sit down in one of the seats that are available, you're more than welcome. We should have plenty of room. Chairman Rogers, you have anything? Okay, Mr. Cannell, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I hope all of the, maybe I'm not
Try it now.
on now. I'd like to try speaking.
Is there a button over there, Tim, you need to hit? Hit the top of the mic.
I think we're on now.
There we go.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Hopefully all the members have a copy of this handout. All right. I'm going to walk through this presentation fairly quickly. I know you probably have a number of questions perhaps, and so I'd like to be able to present the information to you and then allow the time for you to try to ask questions. The first part of this presentation is going to summarize, if you will, some information that we shared a year ago. At the time, we were facing a pretty significant situation where if you recall, the reference to the lines crossing between the revenues and expenses in the resulting legislation, House Bill 326, how that has affected the program, where we stood at the end of fiscal year 12, and what we're looking for fiscal year 13, and then get into, I think, which has probably been what has generated the most interest was some projections we did for fiscal years 14, 15, and 16, where the hope benefit relative to the cost of tuition is headed based upon current revenues and expense line. I've also included in this presentation a chart regarding the Zell Miller program that you may find of some interest, as well as you may recall this year for the first time as part of the changes last year, $20 million was appropriated to the Student Finance Commission to establish a new 1% loan program for students called the Student Access Loan. And I've included some information in here that I think you'll be very interested in. So if we can begin here on slide 2, right behind the cover page. Again, just to reiterate, last December and actually it was a year and a half ago in August that I first met with this joint committee to talk about then at the time the projections we had regarding the revenues and the expenses, which sort of got the ball rolling. So if you go to slide 3 here, you can see at the time then we were here before and I presented to you that we were looking at expenses that were rising with the red line at a pretty rapid rate. Much of that driven by tuition increases, but also driven by the fact we had more kids enrolled in college as a result of our growing population. And that compared conversely to the revenue line, which was the deposits from the Lottery Corporation to the state treasury to fund not only HOPE, but the pre-K program. And those, if you can see there on the gray line beneath the red, that those had significantly flattened out in recent years. And so we had that crossing of the lines where the expenses were significantly running ahead of deposits. So if you could look on slide 4, as a consequence, then we wanted to show what the effect would be of continuing the program the way it was set up in statute, based upon the direction that the expenses were headed in comparison again to revenues. And you can see there was a pretty significant impact on the reserves. At the time, and the end of fiscal year 10, we had almost $1 billion worth of reserves. And the projections that we shared with you a year and a half ago show that those reserves were quickly dissipating in order to try to cover the expenses of the program. So on to slide 5, you can see that there was the overall reserves is the light blue line and how that was declining, and the unrestricted reserve actually had fallen to 0 by the end of fiscal year 12. And so that was the crisis, if you will, we were trying to avoid, because by the time we got to this summer in early fiscal 13, had we not changed the law, not only would we have been expended virtually all of the reserves, Georgia Student Finance Commission actually would have run into a cash flow problem for us being able to draw enough money out of the Treasury to pay the invoices that were coming from the schools. So you all avoided that as a result of the changes to House Bill that were incorporated through House Bill 326. So on slide 6 here, just to recap some of the more significant changes that were included as part of House Bill 326. To get at moving over to slide 7, the most fundamental important change that you made as a result of that legislation, as you recall, previously HOPE was basically driven by tuition increases. As a result of House Bill 326, that was changed. And therefore, going forward, the amount of the benefit would be established through the appropriations process. There'd be a projection that we would do each year, submitted as part of our normal budget submission to the Office of Planning and Budget. They would review it, the governor would make a recommendation, then it was up to you and the appropriation side to decide at what benefit level, based upon the revenues available, what the benefit level would be. That was the most fundamental change. So if we can go now to page 8, slide 8, we can see where we ended fiscal year 11. We ended fiscal year 11, and all these expense numbers, by the way, include pre-K. So we ended the year collectively spending a bit over $1,108 million, and we had previously provided you a projection of $1,127, so we came pretty close. And then on the revenue line, on the next page going to 9, it came in at $846 million, which was a decrease of some $40 million over the previous fiscal year. So where the expenses came in pretty much where we thought they would, unfortunately, the revenues came in lower. So if you now go to page 10 on the reserve balance, you see that would have then fell by more than we had projected as a result of the fact we had less revenues to work with. So the difference between the expenses and the revenues. So that's where we ended fiscal 11. So let's now take a look at the current fiscal year. And if I can get you to look at slide 12. In slide 12 on the red line, the box at the top, we are projecting expenses, again, including pre-K, of a bit over $924 million year end. And then moving over to the next slide, slide 13, we didn't know really what, since we don't control the deposits or the revenue side of things, we just kept that flat from the previous year at $846 million. So that would leave us going over to slide 14, an end-of-year balance in the reserves of a bit over $500 million. Now, one of the things to note here that's important, I think, is that as a result of the changes that you made to the HOPE program through House Bill 326, you see the note there at the top of the page next to the red line that those changes cumulatively reduced the expenses of HOPE by some $275 million. So it was a rather substantial amount of, I don't know if savings is quite the right word since we didn't expend the money, but foregone expenses of $275+ million. So it had quite a dramatic effect on the expense side of things. Now, if we can get you to move forward to slide 16, we wanted to now look at fiscal year 13. And I'll start to slow down perhaps a little bit at this point since this information is more current. Now, the 934, again, this represents the sum of pre-K and our agency's, Georgia Student Finance Commission's projections relative to HOPE. And the number here is based on our request. At the time we did this initially for the first presentation, it was all we did not have the governor's recommendations yet. But let me say a little bit about the governor's recommendations since I've been asked about it quite a bit. The governor's recommendations in total for HOPE is about $30 million less than what we requested. And some folks have asked me, did I see that as a problem? My answer is no. If you recall, we were just getting into with the changes to HOPE in August and September. We had not really seen, obviously, the full effect of what those changes may incorporate. Some of the changes had to do with the way you calculate the benefit, but some of the changes impacted more kind of behavioral kinds of where the folks would continue on the way they did before under changed rules. And so it was a little hard to guess exactly how people would necessarily respond. So we completed and prepared our projections, gave those to the Office of Planning and Budget in late September. And then, of course, as you know, the Office of Planning and Budget, working with the governor, would develop his recommendations, and they would probably finalize those sometime in fairly early December. So over that intervening 2 or 3 month period, they had more information than we had. They had later information than we had. They had some of the invoices begin coming in, so they could have a little more update than we had available to us at the time we prepared our projections. And I will say this also. If the governor's numbers are closer to what we finally spend, then great. We've spent $30 million less than we would have under our scenario. If our scenario is a little closer to the mark, then that's okay too, because we will then come back to you in next year's amended budget and say we need a little bit more in this and this account in order to square away with what we project the need to be for the end of the fiscal year. So I think the $30 million in the great scheme of things, given the size of the program, is a fairly immaterial number. So I won't belabor that anymore, but to say that I don't think that's a problem at all. If you then would look at slide 17, we are looking here, we project that the revenues for the Lottery Corporation will be up. In fact, they through the second quarter, you'll see that they're up about 1.7% over last year. It was certainly a good thing. And the number that if they hold that rate of increase to the end of the fiscal year, that 853 probably is about right in the ballpark. So if you now go to slide 18, given that rate of expense, if that's what occurs, and the rate of deposits, if that's what occurs, then the reserve balance in green would fall to $420,897,000. Going over to slide 19, you see there's an added thing that says reserve of $423. Now, the reserve is determined, again, in House Bill 326 by saying that the reserve amount should be equal to 50% of the prior year deposits. So if the prior deposits were the 846, that's where the 423 comes in. Now, just bear in mind, not that all shouldn't be considered alarmist looking at 427 below that number, because this 420 does not take into account any interest earned in the reserves during the course of the year, nor does it reflect any lapsed money that comes back to the Treasury. So at the end of the year, we feel quite comfortable that the ending year balance from the reserves and the Treasury will be somewhat higher than the minimum, so we'll be in good shape there. Now, if we go on to assumptions related and looking forward into 2014, 2015, and 2016, we assumed that the rate and the number of growth and number of HOPE awards would be 4%. That's a little less than has been the recent history in terms of the growth of awards, but not much. And we hope that with the improving economy, perhaps there will be a little bit of slowdown in the rate of growth in those needing HOPE. We looked at tuition increases annually of 3%. We assumed that the apportionment of lottery revenues between pre-K and Hope would remain relatively the same as they are now, that one didn't grow at the expense of the other. They stayed in relative parity. That the mandatory fee levels were flat at the current levels for the post-secondary institutions on the public side. And the beginning in 2014, at that point, we would, as you've seen from the previous slide, spent down the reserves to the point where basically at the mandatory minimum. So going forward from 2014 forward, all the money we have available for Hope and pre-K is what's deposited from the Lottery Corporation. We are at that point truly spending within our means. So if I can get you now to look at 21. So on slide 21, you'll see at the top of the page in red where the expenses have been, and you see they are in effect forced down, one way to say it, I guess, to make sure that they are in line with the revenues, and the revenues are in green. And you see that those, we're just right, we have no basis to make an assumption about where revenues may change. And then consequently in blue is what the reserve funds are. And you see those stabilize, and we just carried forward the 420 number. As I said, it'd probably be a little bit higher, but it will be basically static at that point. The reserves will be at the mandatory minimum. We will expend within the revenues available to us. Now if you go over to slide 22, on slide 22, in the initial presentation I made it earlier this session, I said verbally, and here I wanted to show this, if a policy decision was made, as you know, the governor's recommendation for FY13 would maintain the dollar benefit level of Hope at the same level as it is in FY12. So we simply said, okay, if the desire was to maintain the benefit levels flat over the projection period of 2014, 15, and 16, how many more dollars would we need in order to achieve that objective? As you see here, if you look at the red line where it says 961.72 and the little footnote above that, what that means is that in order to maintain the benefit level in FY14 at the same level as FY13, we would need a bit over $107 million more. And of course, as we go out on the time frame or on the projection to 2016, you'd see that it rises to $163 million. So part of the reason I wanted to share that with you is give you the sense that if you want to achieve the one policy objective of trying to keep the benefit levels flat, the amount of dollars that are associated with doing that are fairly significant. So any changes that you choose to make have to be of enough magnitude, obviously, in order if that's what you want to achieve. So it's a fairly substantial amount of money. So then we wanted to take a look at, okay, if we took three examples of three specific schools and looked at what students would pay based upon the scenarios just outlined to you. So if we can go now to slide 24. In all three of the schools, we did the same, methodologically did it the same way, so they apply equally. Starting at the bottom of the page here, in the red line, this represents the mandatory fees at the University of Georgia for a semester. And then the blue line represents the Hope benefit, or rather tuition, the tuition. And then the green line represents the sum of the blue and the red line. So the green line represents what is owed by a student on a semester basis at the University of Georgia, combining 15-hour semester hours, which is full-time, which if a student took 15 hours, 2 semesters a year, they'd graduate in 4 years, what that cost would be. So then if we now go to slide 25, we tried to then show what is the effect then on the available lottery revenues that we have to work with and the increasing number of awards that we're making, and this making those assumptions regarding tuition increases that I said before. What is the effect on both the Hope benefit as well as the amount of out-of-pocket expense that a student would have to incur on a semester basis? So you can see on the blue line here, the green line simply a carryover from the previous page. It shows the cost. The blue line shows where the Hope benefit is headed, and the red line shows the out-of-pocket expenses. So you can say based upon this set of assumptions, in fact, the student will pay more out-of-pocket on a semester basis at the University of Georgia in 2016 than they receive in Hope benefit. And then we did the same thing on page 26, we did that on the scenario in which the benefit level remained the same. Clearly, if the benefit level remains the same as it was in FY13, then the out-of-pocket expense will be suppressed by the amount of the added hope above the original projection. So here you can see, excuse me, the red line stays below the blue line, the out-of-pocket expenses under that scenario. So we did that with the next several pages. We did the same thing for Georgia Perimeter College, and basically the same picture. You can go through the same, you look at them all the same, was approached the same way. The out-of-pocket expenses do exceed the benefit by the time we get to 2016. And then what the out-of-pocket expenses would be if we were able to maintain a flat level of benefit. And then we looked at one of the technical colleges. And I'll just hasten to add, if you look at on that first one, they're on slide 30 now. Between 2011 and 2012, that kind of peculiar slope, that's an anomaly just created by the fact that the technical college is converted from a quarter to a semester basis. So really kind of look forward from that point to see what the relevant information, I think. So again, looking at that, by the time I got to 2016, the out-of-pocket expenses would slightly exceed the hope benefit under this scenario. And again, what the out-of-pocket expenses would be on slide 32 in the event we're able to maintain the hope benefit at a flat level. So that sort of gets through the hope portion. I'm going to walk you through the add-on information I mentioned earlier and then certainly stop and try to answer your questions. So if we can go to the first slide after the one that says Zell Miller Scholarship Qualifiers. Okay. As you can see across the top, this covers 2007. These are calendar years 8, 9, 10, and 11. The top line there, which says certified grads, is basically the number of graduates, high school graduates we see in our state, and you can see it's a growing number. We have a bit of a dip between 2010 and 11, but we have generally been growing. The next line shows you the number of calculated Hope qualifying 3.0 students as a percentage on the next line of those who are certified grads. So if you look under 2011, just to be clear, the 41,398 is 42.56% of all the certified graduates from that high school year. Then beneath that, we have a row of numbers that show the number of the high school of all certified grads. So, and again, 2011, of the 97,269 certified grads, 11,224 were those that had GPAs of 3.7 or higher. And that represented 11.54% of all certified grads. Now, that's before we then use the filter for those who also, as you know, in the law, student not only has to have the GPA, they have to have the SAT score. So that bottom line down there, beginning under 2007 with 4,661, shows the numbers of students who are actually Zell Miller scholars. And collectively, for the 5 years here in this slide, there were some almost 27,000 students who qualified as Zell Miller scholars, and that's about 14% of all Hope scholars. Clearly, it's going to be less than half of that compared to all grads, high certified graduates. So that's information relative to Zell Miller. Now, if I can get you to turn your page to slide 35 and really go over to slide 36, we want to talk a little bit and give you a briefing on the Student Access Loan Program. Again, this is the first year of the program, $20 million, all lottery funded. If you recall some of the discussion about this last year, it was intended to try to help students and to a degree offset the impact of some of the programmatic changes that had a result of lowering benefits. This was based upon a pre-existing law that's been on the books for several years. It would provide for students could borrow money for 10 years at 1%. And that students must basically, it's a loan of last resort. Students to qualify would basically have to exhaust all other federal and state available financial aid. So before they could get in, they could borrow up to $10,000 a year and $40,000 over their 4-year college career. So let's turn to page 37 and a little bit more information. There's a service cancelable component. Post-secondary school certification required is basically the school has to determine, does the student have an unmet financial need that the loan can be used for? That's basically the school's role in all of that. And that the law also provides that from all the applications that we receive, at the time that the window closes, the application window, then the pool is created and we use a random selection process, use a computer-generated number to pick the applications out They're sent on to the schools certify the loans, and we kept pulling loans out of the pool until we've exhausted all the money. So far we've gone through, we had our first loan cycle was last summer, and we had to open it again in this early fall, and the applications period is closed, and we're now in the process, frankly, of getting close to the end. And you can see here some statistics on slide 38 that we received more than 8,800 applications from students. More than $65 million were requested. Although statutorily a student could request up to $10,000, the average loan request was from $7,360. We were particularly pleased that we got applications from 95 schools. There are a little more than 100 HOPE-eligible schools in the state, so the fact that in this first year of a program, we got such a wide dispersion of loans, we frankly were very pleased about, because we did try hard to try to get the word out to all the schools and their students about the availability of the money. And we have, as you can see here at the bottom of this page, as of the 23rd of this month, we've got $15 million approved. We're still working through applications. As I said, I think by the end of January or very shortly thereafter, we will have completed, and all $20 million would be committed to students. So for now, I can get you to go to the, slide 39. 39 shows you where the top schools where loans were approved from both the first and second round, and this is of, again, the 23rd of January. You see there's a mix of types of schools there and sectors, as we sometimes refer to them. And then if I can get you to turn over to slide 40. And this breaks it down by those sectors that I referenced, whether it's the university system, the technical college system, proprietary schools, or nonprofit private schools. Now, I think something now that you're going to be, I hope, pleased with, we were pleased with, if you can go to slide 41, please. We wanted to see, of all the loans that approved, how many of those were loan recipients who are HOPE eligible. And you can see overall about 29% of the total approved application count were for students who are also eligible for HOPE. Now, if you turn over to the next page, something that I think, well, we're pleased with, hopefully you will be, on slide 42, then we wanted to look at, aside from HOPE, what's another characteristic of the students that are receiving the assistance. And if you're familiar with the Pell program, which is a federal program that goes to the neediest students, generally with what's called an EFC, or expected family contribution, up to $5,000, what percentage of the total loan pool was going to the neediest students based upon family income. And you can see here on the far right, on this particular chart there on page 42 or slide 42, that overall 72% of the loan funds were going to students who were Pell eligible. And so if concerning these are the neediest students in our schools, we thought that was probably a pretty good thing. And then the last page 43, we tried to combine those who were both Pell eligible as well as HOPE recipients. And you can see the resulting numbers there. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my report to you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we will entertain questions. Before we do, I just want to ask a question of my own. Can we go back to slide 42, one of the last ones that you mentioned to us?
Yes.
42 and 43. Let me make sure I understand. What you're telling us there is that of those HOPE scholars who were also Pell Grant eligible, there were 72% of them?
On slide 42, it only deals with the Pell eligibles, not the HOPE eligibles.
Okay.
So we did HOPE separately, then we did Pell separately, then we combined the two.
Okay,
so this slide is only dealing with Pell eligibles. So 52% of the funds went to students who had 0% EFC, the poorest of the poor students, if you will, and 72% went to those at 5,000 or less, which would include those at 0.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, and one more question before before we move on. The other question is, of the loan program, can you tell us about the loan program, the 1% loan program, and the success of it and what we're doing?
Well, we haven't dispersed all the loan funds yet this first year, so we don't have much history to go on yet. And as you know, there is a service cancelable component to a portion of it, those who pursue careers in STEM-related or education STEM-related fields. But I think in terms of what we hear from college presidents is that Oftentimes, the biggest reason that students do not complete their education is lack of financial resources. And so hopefully this program that you have funded helps address that need that many students have.
Okay.
And as the loan funds, just one other quick thing too. It's obviously, again, this is sort of a long-term proposition. These are 10-year loans at 1%, so the loan payment amounts, as you can imagine, $7,300 are pretty low. But as the funds come back in future years, obviously our intent is to recycle those dollars into additional loans.
Okay. And we've not been in it long enough for you to make any projections with that? No. Okay.
No.
All right, questions? Representative Ash, is that?
It is. Thank you very much, and thanks for all of your hard work. I want to ask questions in two areas. One is maybe the quicker answer, and it has to do with these HOPE grants. Last year, we instituted a 3.0 grade point average for them. If we'd lowered that to 2.5, what would it cost?
I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to try to do a calculation. I do have something from the technical college from Ron Jackson that indicates that the GPA requirement of 3.0 has resulted in, I think, 4,200 students no longer being eligible for the grant. We'd probably have to get some data from them on that, but we'd be more than happy to do so.
If you would help me with both lowering it to 2.5 and to 2.0.
Sure, we'll get that
appreciative.
number for you. And I've got folks taking notes to keep up my promises. So
Great, thanks. You always have. Now I'm curious about the Zell Miller scholarships. What did it cost us to give those scholarships last year? How much money did we spend on Zell Miller scholars?
about $60 million. It is interesting to note, and I only note that because I find it kind of interesting. Obviously, the distribution of Zell Miller scholars is not even throughout the system, as you could probably guess without even me telling you this. But it is sort of interesting to note that 86% of all the awards go to students at two institutions, University of Georgia and Georgia Tech. I guess that's not a big shock to anybody. And if you add in Georgia Southern, Georgia State, and Georgia College and State University, you get a percentage of slightly in excess of 90%. So we pretty much know where our Zell Miller scholars are going.
What do we know about where they're coming from? The demographics of county, race, economic level?
We can probably find out where they come from, but we don't collect any data regarding race. So that I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Income level?
University system may be able to tell you that if they collect that, but we don't through the application process for HOPE.
I'd love to know where they come from geographically, if we might.
We can do that.
What percentage of the students eligible for a Zell Miller scholarship take advantage of that scholarship?
Again, we're first year of Zell, so it's sort of hard. But one of the things that we do is, as you may know, each year the Georgia Student Finance Commission hosts with the governor at the mansion a reception for all the state valedictorians. And we've been doing this since Governor Miller was in office. And for the last several years, what we do is we always ask the students, obviously their name for their name tag, but where they're going to college. And this event takes place in June, so by then they should all pretty much know. And we've just, out of a matter of curiosity, sort of began tracking how many of them were in-state versus out-of-state school. And it's been very consistent over the 3 years that we have the data that it's about 30% of those students go out of state. Obviously, you're talking about the elite students in Georgia, and so these are students that have obviously a lot of options. They are highly desirable from schools outside of Georgia, and they get access to a lot of financial aid. So if we're able to keep 70%, that's probably pretty good.
The 1,200 on the SAT, how was that number derived?
I'm going to have David, would you answer that so I say it correctly? It's in a single sitting of math and verbal. Is that right? Okay.
But the 1,200, how did you pick that number to be the cutoff?
I'm not sure we actually picked it. David, do you recall what it's related to? Right. But why was 1,200 picked? Do you recall? Making an assumption in terms of the distribution of students that would qualify based upon a 1,200 SAT, because I think, as I recall, we were looking at 10%. And I think that's what was talked about of students. So that's where it must have come from.
Got it. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'll have some more at an appropriate moment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Senator Warwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the information you brought us, Tim. And I wanted to, I think it'd be helpful for committee members to have our arms around the mission of your agency and the budget. The mission, I think, states that it's to improve access to higher education.
Right. That's correct, for post-secondary education.
To post-secondary education. And that would, I'd like to see you square that mission with the impact of what we did to the HOPE program last year. Expanding access, when we go strictly on these high scores, you know, the 3.7, which is quite high, and the 1200 SAT, we all know that the students that come from families that are college educated and families with good incomes score better. When we put all these stipulations in like that, aren't we in fact helping pay the kids' tuition that come from families that can pay the tuition, and that we are putting up a barrier to the kids who are maybe first generation trying to get in college, who are the lower income families across the state? How does that square with a mission of expanding access to higher education?
Well, I guess my best response to you would be that those decisions made in House Bill 326 represent policy decisions.
Right.
And our job at Student Finance is to carry out the requirements of statute. So if a requirement is put in that the student must have a 3.7, that's how we administer the program. Clearly, you've got the dynamic between revenues, expenses, and benefits. And so, you know, in trying to work through 326, that was a job that the General Assembly had to come up with, trying to balance those three factors to come up with a program design that would stay within the revenues.
So we could have, though, as a consequence, really worked against the mission of your agency. We worked against the direction of expanding access to higher education. When that bill, and I know you didn't write that bill. I'm not laying that at your doorstep, but it seemed to be fair to say that we ought to re-examine the impact, and you're providing us numbers of that bill on whether we are fulfilling the mission of expanding access to higher education.
And again, it's a matter of the policy decisions the General Assembly makes that's reflected in statute.
Yeah, I thought well put. The agency itself, over which you're presiding for some years now, actually.
6 and a half.
That's right. Who's counting when you're having fun? I think that lottery dollars that come into your agency are $7.7 million.
Correct.
How does that match with the other money that you have to run your operation? And what else are you doing besides administering the HOPE program? So how do you understand what I'm getting at? We
Yeah,
get
I'll take a stab at
$7.7 million lottery dollars.
You're probably going to regret asking the question, but let me take a stab at it. The Georgia Student Finance Authority is the state agency that administers the state programs, which is HOPE, which is also tuition equalization grants and HERO and state-funded programs as well. And the appropriation, the 7.7 that you referred to, pays us, if you will, the cost of administering all state programs. Now, in addition to the Georgia Student Finance Commission, which is the state agency, there is also two other legal entities that sort of exist under our umbrella. There is the Georgia Student Finance Authority, which for 45 years was a student loan lender under the Federal Family Education Loan Program. And then there's also the Georgia Higher Education Assistance Corporation, which for 45 years was a student loan guarantor under the Federal Family Education Loan Program. And all three of those entities still exist. Both the authority and the corporation were self-supporting based upon their activities related to the Federal Student Loan Program. And as you probably know, on June 30th, 2010, those programs ended. The Congress made the decision through the Health Reform Act and included provisions in that act related to higher education that ended those programs and consolidated all the ability to make federal student loans solely within the Federal Department of Education. So obviously that affected us and many other states that had similar programs as we have had over the years. As a consequence of that, today we've got 30% fewer staff than I had 5 years ago. We had 195 staff when I got there. Today we've got, in fact, on staff today we have 133. We've got a couple of vacancies, but about 135 or so. And that's pretty much a direct consequence of the fact that those business lines, if you will, the student loans and student loan guarantees went away. And it has a consequent effect on revenues. And so, you know, our historically, if you will, those two entities actually help subsidize the state administration, the state programs, because they did make a little money and it was able to keep down the amount of state funds that were required to administer the program. And so you may have noted that there had been an increase a year or two ago in the amount of administrative fee we got. And that was directly related to the fact, as a result of those two programs being ended by the federal government, the ability of the corporation and the authority to subsidize the state operation pretty much evaporated. So in order to maintain the administration, that's where the number comes from today. I'm pleased to say that if you look at that administrative number we have, as most of you know, we administer GA College 411, which is a website devoted for students to find out about going on to college. If you take out the licensing fee that we have to pay to the company in California that actually owns the site, we get paid about $6.2 million, which represents about 0.9% of the lottery proceeds that we administer. So we frankly feel pretty good. I think we work pretty cheap. So,
Does your agency have state cars?
we have 9 cars. We have 8 cars that we lease. We have 8 field staff, people who live throughout the state, and their job is to visit middle schools and high schools, public and private. Last year, they visited collectively almost 1,500 schools in our state. And we looked at this issue a couple of years ago when the gas prices were starting to really go up, and came through analysis, determined that if we leased 8 cars, we would save or cost avoid some $140,000 over the 5-year term of the lease. And that was based upon $2.44 price per gallon of gasoline. So now, given the price of gasoline, that savings or cost avoidance would be significantly higher. The only other car we have, and the only car, in fact, we have title to, is the same car that we had when I got there in July of 2005.
Parsimonious, one might say. Well, just finally, so then the money that comes from lottery dollars to run your operation is how much?
It's the $7.7 million collectively.
7.7 million. And do you spend more than that running the agency?
Yes. Well, I mean, we still have staff that work for the corporation. We still have staff that work for the authority. And then we have some staff, for example, I'll use myself as an example. I get paid 50% of my salary, if you will, is covered by lottery funds, and 50% is covered by the combination of the authority and the corporation. So we've got a number of employees, because they don't work purely on one or the other, that are in an FTE count as opposed to a pure position count.
So the total dollars that are expended,
It's greater than 7.7.
how much greater? And
I'm not sure I just know that number right off the top of my head. It probably is going to be at least twice that, though, because we've got, as I said, 133 staff, so I can get you that. Be happy to get you that number.
Thank you
But
very much.
Okay. All right.
We maintain a fairly large loan servicing operation that services the FEL loans that we made, plus we're a third-party servicer that actually we service more loans for on third-party basis we do of our own. We still service the state service cancelable loans, that program that existed for a number of years, and now we're servicing a student access loan. All that's done within the authority. Right. Well, service loans with the authority.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Senator Kelsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask you just a couple. Can you tell us what the total dollar of lottery sales were in 2012 and what percentage of those total sales were deposited with the Lottery Corporation?
I'm sorry, I can't. We can get that to you. That's not information that we keep, but I certainly know where I can get it for you. I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Thompson.
Yeah, I just have a question going back. You were talking about the loan funds, that as those were repaid, that they would basically, you would recycle that money into new loans. I was under the impression that that wasn't the way the bill we passed read that you could do that. I mean, have you checked on that to make sure that that's,
Yes, we can do that.
thanks.
Okay. Representative Gardner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. Based on the emails that I've been receiving, people have short memories and seem to believe that the Hope Scholarship was never a needs-based scholarship. So will you review for me quickly what was the initial criteria for the Hope in terms of family income?
There were
And I have
income
another
limits that were in the first 2 years of the program. The first limit was at $66,000, and then in the subsequent year, the next year, it was raised to $100,000, and then the third year following, it was removed entirely.
We have a lot of good ideas in the General Assembly, and last year, House Bill 326 seemed like a reasonable idea, but we also now are forced to live with the unintended consequences of some of our decisions. So when you were asked last year to make projections about the Zell Miller Scholarship, how accurate were you able to project what the outcome?
I think we were, if you look at that, that's one of the reasons I put the chart in here, because we thought we actually are very close on the mark as to more our projection where what actually transpired.
And since they will be getting 100% of the tuition payment and the other students get pretty much what is left over, have you done some projections to show when there will be very little left for anybody but the Zell Miller scholarships?
Well, we certainly did that. We tried to attempt to do that through 2016. If you're asking a question relative to the share of the Zell Miller versus the rest of Hope, we haven't done that yet. That would be not that difficult to do since we have made an assumption regarding the rate of tuition, but we have not actually done that yet.
I think that would be very helpful. My concern is that those who are eligible for the Zell Miller Scholarship have lots of options. Those who are next in line, not the valedictorian, not the salutatorian, but have worked very hard, will be receiving fewer and fewer Hope dollars, and that is of concern to me. So if you would show me kind of a line how those
We will do that.
projections look,
I think it would be factually correct to say that as a percentage of the whole, the Zell Miller component will grow at a relatively faster rate because it is a component of both awards and tuition, whereas the rest of the Hope benefit now is based upon a combination of where the revenues are and the number of students and awards we anticipate making.
So next year, the percentage that the non-Zell Miller scholars will get will be what percent of the tuition?
Well, we've not actually, as I said, done that calculation, but I can tell you we know that the Zell Miller component, as I said, will grow relative to the total.
Right.
And therefore, the amount left over for the balance of the students will be less. So that's sort of reflected in these numbers that we put out here.
So
But we'll come up with something, try to do that through FY16.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is about the Zell Miller Scholar. Do you have demographic information available about the recipients of the Zell Miller Scholar?
We do not.
Can that data be acquired by county, by race?
By county, but not by race, although perhaps we'd have to talk to our colleagues in the university system. They may have it by race, but we don't collect demographic information, but we know where we can determine where the students, David, shaking your head, yes? Where the students actually, Zell Miller scholars actually come from by school. Yes, we can do that.
So it's available by county?
Yes.
What about by income level?
No, since it's not income related.
Okay. Now, they were 20,000 Zell Miller scholaries.
And that 5-year cohort of students, yes, 26,000.
That won the Zell Miller Scholar, but only 10,000 received the Zell Miller Scholar?
Right now, we're not entirely certain because the deadline for submitting invoices from the schools for the fall term is not even expired yet. It's not due to expire until February 10th. So if I gave you a number today, it's going to be different tomorrow. So this is one of those we sort of need to see because we don't have historical data that we can rely on to make an assumption about how many Zell Miller scholars will go out of state. The best we had that I shared with you earlier was that anecdotal information about the number of vowels who indicate they're going out of state to school. So we will find out and be happy to share it, but we don't have that information as yet.
But my question is different. How do we notify that a student is a Zell Miller scholar? Is there some way, is there a definitive notification method?
Yes, to the schools. There's a list generated, just as there's a list generated of all Hope-eligible schools that are made available, of all the Hope-eligible students that are made available to the post-secondary institutions.
And the president of the schools?
Well, it's primarily used by the financial aid office in admissions. So, they put the financial aid office is probably the most, assuming the student's going through the admissions process, at that point it becomes financial aid to come up with the student's package of financial aid to be enrolled in inter-school. So they use it quite heavily, the financial aid office does. And once they have the student's transcript, but until it's gone through the calculation process that we do to kind of officially bless the student as being Hope eligible at that point, the financial aid offices use it.
But that's not until the student applies to college. Is there any way that you can inform the student that they are a Zell Miller scholar and that they're eligible for?
There are a couple ways that a student can kind of track this. First of all, we do a preliminary Hope GPA for prospective graduating seniors. We do that in February. We're doing the process of starting that up. We'll finish that up sometime in February. But also, and the General Assembly's requirement, the statutory change, high schools are supposed to now submit transcript data on students as early as their freshman year of high school. And then we'll take that transcript information and we'll treat it just as we would just for the seniors and do a calculation so that the parent and the counselor and the student can all see where they are relative to qualifying for Hope, or in the case of Zell Miller, how their GPA is stacking up against that 3.7 standard. So that's available as early as the spring semester of the freshman's first year in high school.
But your agency do not contact that student at their home address and said, you know what, you are a Zell Miller scholarship recipient and you're eligible to have your tuition?
We do not do that. We make that information available to the schools.
To the high
and
school?
To the high schools and the colleges, and we also have the students are able to check their individual GPA directly at the GA College 411 website. All they can do is log in, create an account. They can not only see their GPA, but they can see exactly how it was calculated based upon their individual transcript.
Okay. And final question is, where do most of the Zell scholars, what schools do they go to in the majority of them?
86% of them go to UGA and Georgia Tech.
Wow. And that's where a lot of them, and the money follow the students.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator. Representative Long.
Thank you for being here and thank you for the work that you do. If I wanted to get not geographic data, but racial data, basically, comparing maybe Hispanics to whites or Caucasians who are taking or receiving the scholarships, what is that process for me to get that data? Since you say you collect it from the counties, or what is that process?
Well, I can tell you which counties a student comes from, or even at the high school they came from. I can't tell you what color they are. With someone from the university system, is that information that you can provide? That questions come up several times in conversation.
Because in my experience, it's always on the application, as to your racial status of what you are. It's
for the college application, but it's not for Hope.
Okay. It's not. So that's just something that's not available to us as legislators in trying to track our dollars, because we always know what the elephant in the room is, basically, in regards to the Hope funds. And so let's just go ahead and get rid of that dysfunction and maybe perhaps help me, help you, whatever, see me on that path so I can get that data. Because apparently we're having some problems with the salary caps versus who's getting the Hope Scholarship, and we want to track our dollars so that we can be more efficient for our constituents. That's all for our state. So I don't want to put that necessarily solely on your responsibility. Perhaps that's some work we have to do here, but we just want to track the dollars more efficiently.
I hope someone from the university system will contact you. If not, we'll find out the answer, and I'll contact you back if they have the ability to generate that information for you.
And one more question. You said it earlier. I probably zoned out or something like that. What was the cap on the salary cap for people who are eligible for
Hope?
Yes.
There isn't one. There hasn't been since 1995.
students. Okay, we need to do that. Okay, thank you so much. I do appreciate you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Smyrie?
Tim, what really, I'm trying to find the chart that it just jumps out at me. On page, the chart number 5, what did we do? Did we do anything from a policy perspective? That was FY09. That's when the lines, it appears that expenditure shoots up and the revenue remains normal. Did we do anything to make this chart from a policy perspective in the General Assembly? Did we?
Well, this was, I think, the chart that created the response to this clarified the problem that Hope was facing, and it was from this information that the General Assembly and the governor responded with House Bill 326.
So, and this may be this probably is a better question for the Lottery Corporation then, because the revenues continue to decline, but then they just leveled off, and for just 4, 5, 6 years, and even after 2016, there's just a norm. It's a whole harmless position. Is there any reason why it goes from 200 to 400, 600, 800? Is that kind of are we kind of topped out?
Yeah, I agree. I honestly agree with that. It's probably, in fairness to Ms. DeFrancisco, is probably one that she'd be better equipped to answer than I.
That's what I was thinking, that from a policy perspective. But one other thing, how long were we at 50%? Did we start? If I remember, I'm trying to think when we started the Hope, we started out at 50.
66,000.
I'm talking percentage thereof. It was always 100%.
Let's see if I can remember back. Hope initially only covered freshmen and sophomores. If you lost Hope once, you never got it back again. David, anything else that was significantly different at that time?
I thought we had it at 50 before we went to 100.
No, tuition only the first year.
That's what it was then. It was not full.
You never knew that.
It was not full. And how many other states pay 100%? Education
None,
in America.
It's been, from what I know, states, Tennessee and Florida, 2 examples close to home here, have encountered some of the very same problems that we had. They were almost, again, the victims of their own success. They created programs largely based upon the Georgia model, as many states have across the country, and they've experienced much the same, that a combination of population growth, tuition increases grow more quickly than the capacity of their lottery corporations to supply money.
Yeah, we put too many ornaments on this tree.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Amerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When will your report come in terms of the grade structure for the Hope Scholarship students for this particular year?
You're talking about those students that enrolled in college in the fall?
Right. You don't give them at the end of that semester. You give
Right.
them at the end of the first year, I believe.
We could have that. It would probably be sometime this summer, by the time all the schools were able to report finalized grades, and for us to then get the information from them and then do a calculation. I think if I read you correctly, you're interested in with the result of the Hope changes. Has there been a change in the number of students losing Hope their first year?
Yep.
Okay. We will endeavor to find out.
Well, if I remember, we lose something in the order of 60 to 65% first year.
That's correct.
That was under the Hope Scholarship where the now Zell Millers were included.
Correct.
So therefore, as we look to the future, if we maintain allowing everyone that has a 3.0 to enter as a Hope Scholarship or on a Hope Scholarship, we can look for a larger percentage to be losing it the first year, because those 4.0s will no longer be calculated with them.
Yes, it probably would be the case, but if we were to try to keep like to like, we probably would include the Zell since they were in the previous historical pattern. So it would be interesting to see what, if anything, has happened as a result of that drop-off rate. And if we lowered it, is it about the same? It would be very interesting to see.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Representative Murphy, do you have one?
Chairman. Sir, some additional information that I think will be valuable will be a list of the top 10 counties that are providing, I guess, supplying these Zell Miller Scholars, as well as the top 10 high schools. It's apparent that it's possible that these schools or these counties could be doing something very good as far as curriculum that some of the other counties can use to kind of boost their number of students earning the Zell Miller Scholarship. So I think it would be valuable information for us to take a look.
We'll get every member of this committee a breakdown of the Zell Miller Scholars by county and school name.
Right. Perhaps for the last 3 years, please.
Well, the Zell would only apply for this year.
Oh, yeah, well, okay.
So, and it may be probably delayed a little bit. As I said, we don't have all the invoice data from all the post-secondary institutions yet, and it's not due until February. So if you'll give us a little time, we can give you a better, more accurate picture of that if we can wait till those invoices are in.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got everybody at least once. We're going to go around second. I'd like to try to wrap it up in about 5 minutes if we can. Senator Orr, did you have another?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of areas to look into. You said in passing that your intention was to recycle LEF funds, the interest, back into the program. And do y'all have a legal opinion on that? I mean, we've heard from Ledge Counsel that would not be in compliance.
Well, we'll certainly.
I'm sure you'll get a legal opinion on that.
Yeah, we certainly will.
I represent Atlanta and Fulton County schools, and we have an abundance of students with high scores and eligible for the Zell Miller Scholarship. I know that's not the case, and we have such a variation in our school system. You all have visited 1,500 schools last year. There's a rigorous academic courses required that's coming online. What's going to happen with the schools that do not have the AP courses? Are we just again creating another, by our policy, not yours, another barrier to students to access? Do you have data on how many high schools offer these courses and where they're located and whether Georgia high schools are required to offer AP courses?
We do have that data. I don't have it on my fingertips with me today.
Be good to get.
But we don't think that the level of AP required in these new rigor requirements and HOPE will prove to be an impediment to students being able to meet that requirement. Because I think we're only looking, as I recall, one course the first year and two the second, three the third. I'd have to go back and review that again. But I think that the courses, and they don't all require AP courses either. They do require perhaps advanced math. They can be met by taking 2 years of language. So there are a variety of ways a student can meet the requirement. And part of, I think, the response on that was to try to address the issue that gentleman here raised earlier about the fact we had historically such a low, significant rate of fall off of students who got the award, to try to encourage them, because a lot of times, and I hear this, that parents trade off GPA versus rigor. And they're concerned about making the GPA so their student can qualify for HOPE, and so they discourage them from taking more rigorous courses in high school. But in the long run, many times that's sort of counterproductive to that student because they're not really adequately prepared to do college level work. So it was, again, trying to balance rigor against access.
Yeah, that'd be good to have those numbers. And just finally, I think your math totaled up to, the numbers you've shown us, $275 million saved, not expended as a result of the bill last year. And then with the governor's projection this year, it's $30 million less, or savings, that is, from, I don't know.
Projection.
Yeah, from your projection. Does that mean that this total of over $300 million that's been not expended?
I would say that would be right if their numbers are closer to the mark than ours.
Yeah,
and as I said, I hope theirs are.
And all of that has come out of the hides of the students. That is to say, we're given with this projection, $305 million less going to student scholarships.
Correct. Again, all driven by our revenues.
And by that bill, yeah. Right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, very quickly, Representative Ash.
It's a very quick question. All things are sort of driven by our own experience. I'm looking at some grandchildren. What are the projections for 2026?
I may have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, and finally, Senator Jackson.
One quick, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One quick question. You identified that there were over 20,000 Zell Miller scholars that was eligible. But you also said that 11,000 were recipients of the Zell Miller scholarships. What I'm interested in, and what Representative Murphy talked about, was I'm interested in where the people that did not receive the Zell Miller scholars, what counties were they in, and once again I'm asking, can you identify those that were not recipients of the Zell Miller scholars by county, by race, and by county, by race, and by their income level?
Well, again, we don't have income data and we don't have racial data. What I can tell you is where Hope Scholars came from by county. I could even give it to you by high school.
Okay. But I'm interested in those that were eligible, but did not receive Hope, but did not receive the scholarship. I want to know, what was there something in the high school that was missed? Was something in the county that was missed that those students were not informed?
No, because we get if I understand your question correctly, we do the calculation for all graduating high school seniors based upon the transcript data provided to us by the high schools, public and private. And then we generate from that first a preliminary list of Hope eligibles in February, March. And then we do a final calculation based upon the resubmission of that transcript data from the schools at the end of the school year. And that information is available to the students and their parents, to high school counselors, to the financial aid offices in the college. So it's pretty much out there and available for people to find out.
I understand, but I think something happened to those students that was eligible that never received the Zell Miller Scholar. I want to know, did they go out of state or?
We wouldn't know, because if, for example, if a student is Hope eligible and they decide to go to Auburn, we don't track students to go to Auburn. They simply were eligible and they don't show up on a college campus in Georgia. So we don't know why people don't go to school. All we can do is track the ones that show up at a school here in the state.
But it also showed, but if you do that, subtract that, it would show who was eligible that didn't go.
No, because again, they may go to a school out of state. All it's going to show is the students who are eligible and those who showed up on a Georgia campus.
Okay. Mr. Cannell, thank you for your presentation. Members, thank you for your attendance, and we're adjourned.